Rebel Moon is directed by Zach Snyder and stars Sophia Boutella, Charlie Hunnam, and among others. And this story is set in a galaxy known as the Mother World, that's run by this enemy that's called the Imperium. And on the moon of a planet called Veld, there's a woman named Cora that essentially is trying to fight back against the Imperium, and she ends up coming across these different mercenaries to help her along the way. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this movie was directed by Zach Snyder, who I'll admit that I actually am a very avid fan of. I've enjoyed a lot of his films, especially from his early stuff, like with the remake of Dawn of the Dead. I love 300. I still haven't seen all of Watchmen, but from the parts I have watched of it, it's a really great movie that I really enjoyed. And then, of course, I really loved Man of Steel, and I'm hit and miss on some of the movies that he's on when it comes to some of his other films, like for example, with the theatrical version of Batman vs Superman, that I think was very butchered by the studio, but was an improvement with his director's with the Ultimate Edition. And then I really got a kick out of his the Justice League version that he originally shot, which I thought was really good. And then, of course, a couple years ago, we got his more original films that he did called Army of the Dead, which I thought was fun, but it still had some issues that kind of kept it back. But with that being said, this was actually a project that Zack Snyder actually wanted to pitch to Lucasfilm, or where he wanted to make it as a Star Wars film. And I could see the idea of what he was trying to do with it, but a while back when he pitched the idea, they shot it down, and so he ended up wanting to take his idea to Netflix. And ever since he's done Army of the Dead a couple years ago, it seems like this is now his go-to when it comes to making movies and stuff. And I'll admit that I didn't really pay attention much as far as the movie coming out, because I saw like maybe one or two trailers of it, but I didn't really get quite as hyped for it because I just kind of went in with just open expectations, like, okay, well, it seems like Zack Snyder's kind of doing his own version of Star Wars that was rejected, so let's see how it goes. And I was still open-minded for it. And I gotta say that after upon seeing the film, out of all now keep in mind, before I get into this, I will have to address that this movie was edited to where basically Netflix had to make Zack Snyder had to pretty much make two versions for Netflix. What we have is the PG-13 edited version that, as far as I know, has taken away a lot of stuff that he probably planned for his extended R-rated cut, which we'll be getting next year. Now, going just based off the version that we got from Netflix, I can say out of the films that I've seen from Zack Snyder, well, I gotta say this is probably the absolute worst so far. Now, keep in mind that there is some positives I will get into, and I'm just solely going based off the version that's been released, and so this could change possibly if we see the longer cut, the different version that he releases later. But going solely based off the version he released on Netflix, this is definitely a film that I didn't really have much expectation for, so I wasn't entirely disappointed with. But for any kind of expectations I had, it did kind of go overboard because, unfortunately, it missed the mark on a lot of things that are very noticeable and a lot of things that were very hindered by a lot of stuff that really didn't work for the movie overall. And so, to get my pros out of the way, I will say that the cast in this were great. I thought Sophia Boutella was great as the lead. She's definitely the one that really gets like the most backstory in this. And to its advantage, I do like some aspects with her. I do like some things with her character that we do get with her backstory and stuff that does feel very warranted the way the movie goes along. And I'm sure, and hopefully when they get to some other stuff that fills in more her character, if we get to the sequels and stuff, they'll fill in more. But she really holds her own, and she, I thought, was really, badass in her own right. And there is a really cool, interesting backstory they give her that I thought really was well planned with how they're going to approach it. And so there's still some mystery to her that we're probably going to explore later with the second part. But for the backstory that we do give it for, I thought was a really good take in what we were getting and stuff. And I think that there is still a good ideas that I hope they explore further with her character. And then the rest of the cast are great too. I like seeing Charlie Hunnam. I've always been an avid fan of him. Not really much to go off his character, but I do like him at his presence in the film, and he definitely kind of plays basically the Han Solo equivalent, because the movie does have a lot of derivative stuff that you've seen from Star Wars in certain areas, and also taking liberties from even its own inspirations, like from what I heard, the Seven Samurai, and from Dune also, which, yeah, there are certain things I could also see the similarities with Dune, especially with the whole Imperium wanting to get the whole, stuff from the farming and everything like that, if from what I heard in the book of Dune, that's a big thing with the whole spice and all that. And so There's that, but I just saying that as far as like his performance goes, I thought Charlie Hunnam really was good, and the rest of the cast is really good too. It's just that it really falls into more of the writing at stake, where they're not really given a whole lot of material to work with. And so, getting to my other pros, I will say visually, the movie is very, it's Zack Snyder, so it's come to expect that really visual flair that he really does with a lot of his films, where it's beautifully shot with the planets we go to and stuff. And a lot of some of the creature designs I thought were really interesting too. I don't know if some of them were practical, but if they're CGI, they were rendered really good for the most part. And then some of the action scenes I thought were really fun too, especially when we get some fights that happen at the beginning of the film. And then as the movie was going along with some of the other action sequences we get, where especially this one character they introduced later, I forgot the actress's name, but the one who has basically like the swords and stuff that resembled lightsabers. I thought she had a really cool fight scene that I really enjoyed. And then we have the climax that takes place at the end that I thought was pretty good. And so there isn't a whole lot of action to be told, but when it is on screen, it is a lot of fun, and it definitely does showcase a lot of, the trademark style that Snyder does with his slow-mo and stuff, which can be kind of overboard in certain scenes, especially in the beginning at points, but I still thought it still worked to its advantage. But other than that, I will have to say this is now where I kind of have to get into my cons, and if there's any kind of minor spoilers, I'll probably get into, but so if you haven't seen the film, you have been warned if I give away anything. But I will have to say that one of my biggest problems from the get-go is the fact that the movie already starts with some exposition that takes place, that as soon as you hear the narration and the backstory of what's happening, especially when you hear the narration from Anthony Hopkins in the film, who, by the way, I'm not trying to backpedal, but I liked his character that's in the film. That's basically this kind of robot type of character that reminded me a little bit of that robot that was from Rogue One, which this movie really has a lot of similarities with, and in that this robot was essentially, in that this robot was the last of his kind, and he was basically like a knight that was turned into that was like a night robot or whatever from like the old times and stuff. And I actually thought he had a really genuine good moment with this girl that took place, the robot character, and Anthony Hopkins does a great job voicing the character and stuff, but to get into my cons with it comes across with that is that in the beginning, when we see this exposition that takes place about the backstory, it literally just starts with a ship going into the space. And if you've seen from other films, that's very unusual, because usually with exposition, you're kind of always thinking of it being text scroll or, seeing visuals that are happening where you're getting the backstory. But the thing that really, kept getting to me is that we get into backstories that characters were talking about, but they're simply just talking about it. We don't see, other than Cora's backstory, where we see it visually happening, all the characters that she keeps coming across at different planets and stuff that she recruits, they literally just get a quick backstory in exposition, and then they go on their journey. It's literally rinse and repeat throughout, and that's a really big problem with the structure I have. And again, I know this might be a fault from the way it was edited. And if it is longer in the extended cut, I can understand, they're probably going into more detail. But from what we've seen, these backstories they give, I felt like I was kind of forgetting some details on, because none of them really stuck out in a good way, because they really just get quick stuff, and that's all we know about these characters. And they really don't come into play much until the climax, and it really seems like it's just wasted potential of really exploring more of who they came from. And a lot of the problem I have too is how they really set up these characters, who they're going after. We get involved with Charlie Hunnam's character at first, because he encounters Cora on the planet and everything. But as they go on their journey, I just found it really questioning, like, okay, what is really the purpose of, or how exactly do they really know all these characters where to go to and everything? Like, there really seems like there's a lot of stuff that's really not explored in this that really could have been handled a lot better. And, I know that the whole thing is for pacing, where they have to keep it going to keep on that adventure vibe and stuff. But even with other films that do that, like especially with Rogue One, which has a lot of big comparison, at least in that film, you get to see the characters really meet up and actually have it earned and actually have build up with it. Yeah, they don't have quite as like fleshed out characters that you really come to expect, but they still really stick out with their personalities and stuff. And with this, some of them do have some interesting personalities, have some really skills, but they don't really have much characters, if that makes sense. There's a certain difference between having a character that just has skills in certain movies than what they're actually like. And I feel like that's the problem with this, is that there's really more world building and more characterization that we're really missing, that the extended cut hopefully fixes and stuff. And I know that's kind of a cheap way of saying, oh, the extended cut version or anything, but because you really need to start with your regular version if you're going to go with that. On top of that, as far as the editing itself goes, you can tell there were scenes where there was going to be like people getting killed in certain parts, and you can tell they cut away because it was PG-13 rated, and that's where the R-rated version is probably going to come in more later with. It just goes to show that this is really a thing I kind of always like wondered, like, dude, studios just not like Zack Snyder doing his versions of movies, Let the directors do their job, That's not just saying Zack Snyder. There's other directors that when they take their vision away, it's like, what the hell is the point of releasing just an edited version that's inferior? Just release the version that's made and then stick to that one. And that's not, and now there are some exceptions where sometimes the regular version or theatrical versions, as they're called, are still good, and then there's director's cut that changes things later on in some cases that can work both ways. But here, in a lot of, and especially with Batman vs Superman and Justice League, those films like really had to get their way of trying to get their longer versions and preferred versions that Zack Snyder intended to make, and it just shows, let the director do their work. Especially if you're on Netflix, it should have been able to just be an easy release the version they intended to speak, that he wanted to. Making a movie like this would be hard to do independently, so I get the stuff when it comes to trying to, go through different ways to get the movie out, to get the movie that you're making out and everything like that. And so that's really the gist of it, because as the movie goes along, it really becomes just a lot of rinse repeat where they just go to different planets and stuff. They pick more mercenaries, and then this is going to be kind of a big spoiler too, but also to get into more stuff with the villain. He does a decent job, because I do like him as the villain in Deadpool, but I did feel like his villain was just so underdeveloped and so like such just a generic and by the book kind of villain that just sadistically murders people and stuff, and there's really nothing to him that really sticks out in a very compelling way, so to speak. When it comes to writing, I think that goes to Zack Snyder, because I remember also really not liking Sucker Punch. I think that was actually the worst film that I did see of his up until this one. And I think that it just shows that some directors, they're probably better off just directing films than they are writing, because with other films that Zack Snyder has done, well, with the exception of Army of the Dead, because he did write that one. I do like that one. I'm just saying that sometimes he's not always the best when it comes to writing, because he's more of a better as a director, And so with this, it just really shows that it's very thinly layered to where there's nothing really going on with a lot of stuff happening, because it's very generic, go on a mission, recruit some good guys, some mercenaries, and fight villains. That's really it. Like, there's more I can go into detail, especially, well, to also, and this is spoilers for those that haven't seen it yet, this is also where I get into Charlie Hunnam's character, because, again, it's one of those things where we have a betrayal that happens with his character and stuff, but there's no build-up, there's nothing really to it to where he sticks out as a character, because really all the characters in this are essentially just standing around just waiting for, or he's either giving orders to people to go around and stuff, or they don't even really like, they seem like they have just conversations, and that's what really is missing with this movie, is it really needs some more energy. I'm not saying maybe throw comedy in there or anything, but at least give us something with the personalities that makes these characters really stick out, instead of them all, having just different skills and stuff, which is good, but you need to also make them as a well-developed characters, and it just, when he has this scene where he's betrayal, it just seems like he just was a waste of time, because as soon as we get into the climax, he's immediately killed off after his betrayal, and it all gets into this final climax, which granted on a visual level it's good, but again we also lose some other characters like Ray Fisher's character, who I forgot to mention, because like I said, all these other mercenaries, they don't really have much to them going on. So when he goes out and dies, I didn't really feel anything, because there was nothing really that built up to make me feel for it, And overall, I can say that this was definitely a very mess of a film, and it could have been a whole lot better. And with that, I give it good intentions, and hopefully the director's cut that comes out is a lot better. But for now, this is definitely going to probably be on one of my dishonorable mentions, possibly. And with that, I'm going to give it a high disaster rate on the Film Freaks meter. And so, for those of you who have also seen Rebel Moon, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.